Good morning, everyone. I'm the Reverend Tony Lorenzen, the minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Meriden and at the Mattatuck Unitarian Universalist Society in Woodbury. We're all really happy you can join us for this online service this morning. Our churches share missions, being Unitarian Universalist congregations that revolve around practicing loving community, creating a place to grow spiritually, and practicing and working for social justice.
Good morning. I'm Kate McKinney. I'm leading the service this morning along with Reverend Tony and our pianist, Ann Quackenbos. Hobie Lewis will help with music, and Jeff May is our online service producer this week. We are grateful you can join us for this online service. We will be here every Sunday morning at 10:30 for as long as we're unable to hold worship in person in our church. If you're having trouble with this live stream, email streaming@UUMeriden.org now. Someone will try to troubleshoot your issues on our end or even on your end if we can. There's a lot going on right now, so keep up with what's happening by visiting our website, web pages, and Facebook pages frequently. Sign up for weekly email newsletters. Right after the service here, there will be coffee hours for each congregation in Zoom. We'll give you the sign-in information at the end of the service.
This time together through cyberspace, when we are with each other, is made holy by virtue of our being together. Being Unitarian Universalists, we begin our service, as we always do, by lighting the symbol of our faith, which is the flaming chalice. Please join me with the words for the lighting of the chalice, and you should see them on your screen. May this flame remind us of the common faith we share in Unitarian Universalism and the power of love that comes from its light. Amen.
Then you shall take some of the blood and put it on the doorposts and the lintels of the houses. And when I see the blood, I shall pass over you, and no plague shall fall upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. Exodus chapter 12. They thought they were safe that spring night when they daubed the doorways with sacrificial blood. To be sure, the angel of death passed them over. But for what? 40 years in the desert, without a home, without a bed, following new laws to an unknown land. Easier to have died in Egypt or stayed there a slave, pretending there was safety in the old familiar. But the promise from those first naked days outside the garden is that there is no safety, only the terrible blessing of the journey. You were born through a doorway marked in blood. We are, all of us, passed over, brushed in the night by terrible wings. Ask that fierce presence, whose imagination you hold. God did not promise that we shall live, but that we might, at last, glimpse the stars brilliant in the desert sky.
A reading from the book of Numbers, chapter 14, verses 1 through 4. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become booty. would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us choose a captain and go back to Egypt. There comes a time in every journey, adventure, quest, when things get really difficult, much more difficult and dangerous than expected. And there's an almost overwhelming urge to give up, turn back, go home, quit. It's just too hard. When the Israelites celebrated Passover and liberated themselves from the slavery and bondage of Egypt, one of the very first things they did was to complain about their new freedom. The reading today from Numbers says, would that we had died in the wilderness? Why is the Lord bringing us to this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and little ones will become booty. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And so they said to each other, hey, let's choose a captain and a leader and go on back to Egypt. Whoa. This is an old preaching trope called the back to Pharaoh syndrome. Okay, here we are. We're wandering around in the desert. We're no longer slaves in Egypt, but geez, this is hard out here wandering around in this unfamiliar desert place. At least when we were slaves in Egypt, we had a little bit of food. And so they turn on Moses and Aaron, the people who orchestrated their liberation, and they tell them, you didn't set us free. You're trying to get us killed. Whew. Can you imagine what Moses and Aaron felt? Folks, we risked our hides standing up to Pharaoh to get you out of slavery, and now you want to go back? And you think we're trying to kill you? Seriously. Whew. Freedom, liberation, wholeness, healing requires facing the uncertain, the unknown, and wandering around in the desert. It is not for the faint of heart. In a sense, it really does require a leap of faith, a leap of trust. Trust that the liberation, the freedom is worth the pain and struggle and readjustment. And faith in trusting the others who are on the journey with you, that they're going to have your back, that you're not in this alone. You know, there always comes a time when the initial idea to change and the inspiration and motivation for that change runs up against the desert. We realize, oh, this is much harder than I thought it was going to be. You know, and that's the time we have to push on through, not plateau out and not turn back. You know, as minister, I hear a lot of things from congregations. We want to grow, but then it'll run up against making a really big change, like putting the hymn lyrics on a screen and having, you know, a band for worship, or moving the time we get together to Sunday evening. And then all of a sudden, this is harder than we expected. Like most of you, I've tried a lot to lose weight in my life, and you know, that always runs up against the idea of having to get up early in the morning to exercise and not eat the desserts. And we get to the point when we're trying to do that, like, forget this, I'm eating dessert and I am sleeping in tomorrow. When things get rough, the temptation is always there to give up and run back to the safety of Pharaoh, the last safe place we were. On the road to liberation, be it personal liberation or a group working towards freedom or to establish justice, or even surviving a pandemic, there comes a time when we all question our ability to make it. We look for a way out. We wish we could just have this over with and done already. But we can't. We have to go on. We must find the strength and the courage and the hope and the faith to make it. We must trust that making it, surviving, finishing the quest, getting through is worth the struggle. And when we get to that point, I think we realize that the only way out of situations like this is to go through them. The only way out is to go through it. And the only way we're going to make it through it is together. It's times like this when we become more than just a community. We develop something called communitas, where relationships in a group are deepened and strengthened and reimagined as we have to rely on each other in new ways to succeed in our struggle or our quest. One of the things that will get us through this desert time together, this time of wandering and social distancing and quarantine, is not going to be our community, but the communitas that will develop out of it as we grow even deeper and more meaningful into relationship with each other. And this deepening will be born of the challenges we're going to have to face together. And the only thing we can't do right now is quit. We cannot give up. We cannot go back to Pharaoh. In recent years, our American society has been going through a back to Pharaoh time. Any progress we've made in terms of social inclusion, diversity, acceptance, fairness, seems like it's trying to be reversed by a lot of people. By a lot of people who are terrified of losing their power and privilege, and they're angry, and they want the whole society to go back to Pharaoh, to a time when women and blacks and Jews and Muslims and gays and Mexicans, knew their place. But we're not going back. We're going through together. William Barber Jr. recently reminded us that Pharaoh is not just a person, it's really symbolic, it's a place, it's empire. It's the place of empire that grinds the oppressed under its heel in pursuit of production and profit. And even in times of pestilence, that empire does not care if the people are sacrificed for that profit. Like the ancient Israelites, we forget, whenever we think we're going to perish in that desert place, that on the other side of the desert place, the other side of the struggle, the end of the journey, is the promised land. A land flowing with milk and honey, or food and justice and safety. The place where we want to be, the opposite of the place of struggle and desert we are now, which is where we don't want to be. So right now we are in that wilderness, and the safety and security of the way we've been used to doing things is on hold, maybe even gone forever. We're all learning to work, to go to school, to go to church, even to organize our home life in new ways. We must adapt as we go because it is the only way to the promised land, the only way to escape Pharaoh in this time of coronavirus. And when we reach that promised land of relative health and safety again, we will find that not only do we not want to go back to life the way it was, but we can't. We will have been formed by our Exodus journey through the wilderness of quarantine. And I believe this formation will make us better at and more intentional in the use of technology. And technology's presence in our daily life will increase even exponentially over what it is now. And yet, at the same time, I think we are going to relearn the importance of family and friends and the healing property of fresh air and spending time in the natural world. I think we're going to come out of this better getting off the screens as well and doing some reading and just enjoying each other's company. I think we're going to value being in each other's presence and just visiting and hanging out in a way we haven't in generations in our culture. And as time goes on the other side of this pandemic, we will tell the story of how we came to make peace with technology while simultaneously remembering the value of personal contact and loving relationship. Passover is celebrated by the Jewish people by retelling the story of the Exodus. The entire story is told. The ceremony for the ritual is called the Haggadah, literally the telling. And this retelling of the Exodus story each year at Passover is how the Jewish people remember where they are, where they've come from, and who they are. What if they had stopped telling their story at the point people demanded to go back to Pharaoh in that Numbers story? What would have happened? I don't know. But they didn't stop there. They had the guts to push on and not go back to Pharaoh. They had the courage to continue, to add to their story, to go from where they didn't want to be in slavery in Egypt to where they did want to be, the Promised Land. Now, there's a midrash, an ancient oral tradition and commentary on the old Hebrew scriptures, a midrash that says when the Israelites reached the Red Sea, the waters did not part right away when Moses raised his hand. The midrash says that the leader of the Israelite army, a guy named Nahshon, stood at the shoreline and began to walk out at the head of the army. He got up to his ankles and nothing happened. And he kept going up to his knees and nothing happened. And Moses is stretching out his hand over the water, but nothing's happening. And he's motioning for Nahshon to keep going. So Nahshon goes up to his waist, and again, nothing. And Moses continues to urge him on, holding his hands out over the water, and Nahshon walks on out up to his neck, and nothing. And Moses continues to motion for him to keep going. And Nahshon takes a breath and walks out a few more steps until he is under the water. And that's when the waters part and the Israelites escape. The midrash about Nahshon at the Red Sea tells us that sometimes we have to be in over our heads before the way through opens for us. And here we are now, all certainly in over our heads. And we trust in ourselves, in each other, that that way will open for us and we will get through this together. It's said at Passover that each generation must come out of Egypt for itself. That liberation is never guaranteed, but it takes eternal vigilance and struggle to be truly free. And it's something that each generation has to figure out for itself. For what is necessary for liberation and freedom can change with the ages and with the people's circumstances. So each year at Passover, the Jewish people tell the story of Exodus. This year, I hope this story is a reminder for us that whatever our personal or congregational or cultural struggle is, growing, healing, wholeness, health, liberation, it's always possible. There's always a new chapter to the story waiting to be written, a new and next promised land to be reached, as long as we are brave enough to press on, to walk in over our heads, to not go back to the false promise and fake safety of the Pharaohs, and to take one brave step at a time into the Promised Land. I invite us all into a few moments of quiet reflection. Spirit of life, we gather this morning through wires and waves, signals and servers, and yet we are very much together in heart and spirit. We give thanks this morning for the news that Ann Rishi is going to be a grandmother, and we're holding Mary Ann's friend Jerry in our hearts. We hope that everyone in our community and in the community around us has all the support, comfort, and love that each one of us deserves and needs at this time. We give thanks and our praise to the doctors and nurses and essential workers at cash registers and grocery aisles, among shelves and stacks at the warehouses and in the driver's seats of trucks. We send our patience and support to parents and caregivers. We pray this morning with our Jewish friends in the spirit of Pesach. Long ago, the Jewish people set out on a journey. Desperate from generations of slavery in Egypt, they remembered a happier past of their ancestors and yearned for a happier future for their children. They put their trust in their ancestral God and in the hope and courage to be free. They escaped their captors who pursued them until stopped as if by divine intervention at the Sea of Reeds. They almost gave up and turned back to Egypt, but they found the courage to journey on and finally found a home in the promised land. They remembered their journey and celebrated it with a special meal and passed the story and the meal of remembrance on to their children and those children on to their children, all down the ages until today. We give thanks today for our Jewish ancestors in faith and for our Jewish friends and neighbors today. And along with them, we remember what it means to be held captive and oppressed. And so we pray this morning for all who are still chained, burdened with poverty and disease and violence, still denied their human rights. We too yearn for a time when all human children will sit together at the table of liberation, drink the wine of deliverance, and eat the bread of freedom. Freedom from bondage and freedom from oppression. Freedom from hunger and freedom from want. Freedom from hatred and from fear. Freedom to think and freedom to speak. Freedom to learn and freedom to love. Freedom to hope and freedom to rejoice. And may all the peoples of this earth know these freedoms and this liberation. And soon. Amen. I invite you now to briefly share in our chat what's in your heart this morning. We will name and recognize what we can as we see it. I invite you
Even though we are not gathered at our church buildings, we still need your weekly contributions. We are generous people, and we need you to live into that generosity now. We've made it easy to give online, but if you'd like to mail checks to church, we'd happily and gratefully receive them. If you are not a member of our congregations, please give if you can to support the cost of producing this online service.
When we are at church together, I always ask what we're grateful for during the past week. And if you would like to offer those blessings in the chat, again, we will name and recognize as many as we can. And we want to let us all know that for all these blessings, and even the blessings we leave unnamed here this morning, that we are very thankful, and we give thanks in the name of everything compassionate and kind. Even though we are online today with our service, we are still having coffee hour. To join a Zoom meeting room for coffee hour and conversation, enter the URL you see on the screen for each congregation. The UU Church in Meriden will be at is.gd/UUZoom, and the Mattituck UU Society will be at is.gd/MUUSCT. And we hope you can join us at either one of those if you're new and visiting with us this morning. We extinguish our chalice as we end this service, but we keep that flame with us in our hearts. Continue to be kind and courageous and compassionate. Take care of each other. We will get through this time together. I love you. Dearest holy ones, go in peace.